What is happening right now, today, at this exact moment, is not a surprise to me. It is not a surprise to anyone who has been paying genuine, honest attention to the trajectory of this conflict since the first strikes landed on February 28th. What it is, and what I intend to demonstrate to you in precise, unambiguous terms over the course of this analysis, is the operational confirmation of a strategic reality that a small number of serious analysts, myself included, have been trying to force into the consciousness of Washington's foreign policy establishment for years. A reality that institution has chosen, consistently and deliberately, to manage around rather than confront directly. That choice has now produced a bill. And today, with a ceasefire on the verge of expiring, a naval blockade squeezing what remains of Iranian oil infrastructure, a second round of peace talks in Islamabad that may or may not happen, and a sitting American president publicly warning that lots of bombs start going off if no deal is reached, that bill is coming due in real time as you watch this. Let that situation sit with you for a moment before I explain what it actually means. Because the surface level chaos of the last 48 hours is only the beginning of the story. The ceasefire that began on April 8th was always fragile. The framework called for an immediate halt to hostilities, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and a 15 to 20-day window of negotiations between Iran and the United States. Wikipedia. That window is now closing. The Wall Street Journal reported that Trump was not inclined to extend the ceasefire beyond April 22nd. Wikipedia. And yet, as of today, Trump announced he would extend the ceasefire until Iran submits a unified proposal to end the conflict permanently, citing what he described as a seriously fractured Iranian government incapable of speaking with a single voice. CNN. I want to be precise about what that extension actually represents, because the word extension gets used loosely in diplomatic commentary, and it cannot be used loosely here. This is not a sign of progress. This is not Washington operating from a position of strategic confidence. A senior Iranian advisor dismissed the announcement entirely, saying it means nothing, and that Tehran should respond militarily. CNN. The Islamabad talks that were supposed to represent the highest level direct negotiations between Washington and Tehran since 1979 are, as of this moment, in a state of complete uncertainty. Iranian state television broadcast a message confirming that no Iranian delegation has traveled to Islamabad. PBS Vice President Vance's trip to lead the second round of talks was called off, with the situation described by people inside those discussions as incredibly fluid. CNN, incredibly fluid is diplomatic language, for nobody knows what happens next. And that ambiguity, that absence of strategic clarity, at the precise moment when clarity is most required, is not an accident. It is the product of decisions made across decades. And the questions that honest analysis demands right now are the ones that the emergency sessions in Washington are generating in classified form, but will never deliver in the press statements coming out of those buildings. First, how did we arrive at a situation where the United States is simultaneously blockading Iranian ports, threatening to destroy power plants and bridges, extending a ceasefire with no end date, and waiting for a country it just spent 5 weeks bombing to voluntarily send diplomats to a third country for talks? What does that sequence of events tell us about the coherence of American strategic decision-making in this conflict? Second, the ceasefire framework explicitly excluded Lebanon, and Israel's military is still deployed south of the Litani River, citing continued Hezbollah activity. Al Jazeera, Iran has consistently maintained that Lebanon must be part of any deal. That is not a minor procedural disagreement. That is a structural incompatibility between the two sides' definitions of what peace actually means. Who in the American negotiating apparatus is responsible for allowing that gap to persist into a second round of talks that has not even started? Third, the United States naval blockade of Iranian ports, which Iran's foreign minister called an act of war, is continuing even through the ceasefire extension. CNN Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed that oil storage at Iran's Karg Island will be full within days, meaning Iranian oil effectively has nowhere to go. CNN. If you are applying maximum economic pressure simultaneously with diplomatic outreach, you are not conducting a peace process. You are conducting a pressure campaign and calling it a peace process. Those are different things with different outcomes. And Washington appears to be doing both at the same time without a coherent theory of how they connect. Fourth, on Sunday, United States Marines seized an Iranian-flagged container ship near the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera Tehran has pledged retaliation. The second round of talks was supposed to happen the same day. I want you to hold those two facts next to each other and ask yourself what kind of strategic discipline produces that combination of actions in a 24-hour window. Now, let me address the deeper question directly, because it is the question every serious analyst is being asked right now, and it deserves an honest answer rather than the institutional hedging it will receive in official channels. Iran entered this conflict having already absorbed enormous damage. Israeli military strikes in 2024 and joint strikes with the United States over 12 days in 2025 had already significantly degraded Iranian defenses and its nuclear program before the February 28th campaign even began. House of Commons Library. The Iranian regime lost its supreme leader in the opening salvo. The conflict displaced more than 1/6 of Lebanon's population and killed thousands across the region. Wikipedia. By any conventional measure, Iran should be capitulating. It is not capitulating. It is negotiating from a position of studied defiance, setting conditions, rejecting proposals, and now, apparently, threatening new battlefield cards that have not yet been revealed. That is not the behavior of a state that has been strategically defeated. That is the behavior of a state that has concluded its adversary's political will is more exhaustible than its own capacity to absorb pain. The American defense establishment's institutional response to that reality has been a persistent assumption that enough pressure produces compliance. That assumption is being tested in real time, and the results are not straightforwardly confirming it. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most consequential oil choke points, has been severely disrupted since the conflict began, causing fuel shortages across parts of Asia and rippling effects through the global economy. Encyclopedia Britannica. Only 12 vessels crossed the strait in a 24-hour period as of yesterday, with most passing through the narrow Iranian-approved route near Bandar Abbas. NBC News. The economic damage is not being absorbed only by Iran. It is being absorbed by every nation whose energy supply runs through that waterway, which is most of the world's major economies. That is leverage that does not disappear because Washington extends a ceasefire. Most people stop here. That is exactly why they miss what matters most. Because the technical and diplomatic story of the last 48 hours, as significant as it is not the deepest level of the strategic problem that produced this moment. The deepest level is institutional. It is about the gap between what the situation actually requires and what the machinery of American foreign policy is structurally capable of delivering. American officials have suspected a significant divide between Iran's negotiating team, led by Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and the country's military leadership in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, raising fundamental questions about who can actually sign off on any deal. Wikipedia. If that assessment is correct, it means Washington may be negotiating with representatives who do not have the authority to deliver what they are negotiating. That is not a problem that a ceasefire extension resolves. That is a structural problem about the nature of the Iranian state that needs to be understood and addressed before any agreement can be durable. Iran's chief negotiator stated publicly that Tehran has new cards on the battlefield that have not yet been revealed. PBS Washington is treating that as rhetoric. Maybe it is. But the analytical record of this conflict, of the entire preceding decade of strategic interaction between these parties, suggests that treating Iranian statements as pure rhetoric has been one of the most consistently expensive analytical habits in American strategic planning. Russia is watching. China is watching. Chinese involvement in the initial truce negotiations was confirmed by the White House itself. Wikipedia, Beijing's strategic opportunity in this moment is not primarily military. It is diplomatic. A conflict that has visibly strained American strategic bandwidth, disrupted global energy markets, and produced a negotiating process of chaotic public uncertainty, creates precisely the kind of geopolitical space in which Chinese patient, structured, disciplined diplomacy tends to generate lasting influence. The ceasefire process that unfolds across the coming days is an opportunity for exactly that kind of positioning. The Gulf states watching this unfold are already drawing conclusions about the reliability of the American security architecture they have built their strategic posture around. The nations beyond the region are drawing different but equally significant conclusions about the returns available from the kind of asymmetric defiance that Iran has now demonstrated can survive even this level of direct military pressure. What needs to happen now, and I say this as someone who has spent professional years studying the institutions I am criticizing, is a genuine strategic reckoning. Not a ceasefire extension announced on social media, not a round of talks that one side has not confirmed attending, not a public ultimatum delivered alongside a diplomatic olive branch in the same news cycle. A genuine reckoning with the foundational question: what kind of engagement with Iran is actually capable of producing a durable regional settlement? And what does the United States need to be willing to accept and offer to make that engagement possible? The answer will be uncomfortable. It will require acknowledging Iranian strategic interests that American policy has historically refused to legitimize. It will require accepting that a state which has survived maximum pressure, direct military attack, the death of its supreme leader, and the degradation of its allied networks is not a state whose core security calculations are going to be resolved by a naval blockade and a Truth Social post. It will require the kind of strategic realism that treats adversaries as they actually are, rather than as the frameworks built around them suggest they should be. The ceasefire is extended. The talks are in limbo. The blockade continues. The deadline exists and does not exist simultaneously. This is where we are today. Whether the institutional reflexes that produce this situation possess the self-awareness, the intellectual honesty, and the political courage to build something genuinely different from what they've been building, I genuinely do not know. What I know with complete certainty is which outcome is necessary. The question I leave you with is not about Iranian capability or Iranian will. Both of those have been established in terms that cannot be walked back. The question is whether Washington can produce the strategic clarity that this moment demands before the window to do so closes permanently. That is the most important open question in global security right now. And it is the question that nobody in the mainstream of American strategic commentary is willing to ask out loud. I am asking it. Stay sharp.